Welcome. Welcome all of you from wherever you are to this Cybersecurity for BACnet Building Automation Systems webinar. BACnet International is pleased to bring you this update on cybersecurity for building automation, an important and timely topic. I'm Andy McMillan. I'm president of BACnet International, and I'll introduce our session today and get us started. So, over the next 60 minutes or so, we hope that going through this process will leave you with the opportunity and the ability then to be able at the end to describe the importance of cybersecurity in commercial building automation systems and understand the role of BACnet SC in cybersecurity, as well as describe the management of future BACnet devices and systems as they will come along over the next couple of years, and describe the kind of information and concerns that IT professionals will need in dealing with BACnet systems to ensure cybersecurity compliance. To accomplish these objectives, we have a panel of 3 speakers today. I'll be speaking a little bit on roadmap of cybersecurity implementation. Jim Lee with Symmetrics will be talking a bit about the importance of adopting IT technologies and best practices in cybersecurity implementations. And Carol Lamonaco will be talking a bit about the planning and design for cybersecurity and building automation. Over the course of the webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A button on your webinar platform to bring questions to us, because our intent is to have 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the webinar to answer your questions live. So feel free to put those in as we go, and we'll collect them and have a Q&A session at the end. So let's get started. What I want to do first is talk a bit about the roadmap to fully secure BACnet systems. And I want to start by talking about a recent trip I took to Toronto in Canada. So we flew into Toronto, my wife and I did, and we wanted to get to Stratford, Ontario, and then move across the country to Detroit for a family outing for the 4th of July. So what we found was we got to Toronto, we stayed there a couple days, and then went to the Hertz counter and got ourselves a rental car. Now, I had no doubt that the GPS on my phone would get me to Stratford and then would get me to Detroit. So getting point to point was straightforward. But even with that, I still wanted to have a paper map. So I went to the Hertz counter, got the paper map, and I did that because the paper map gave me a high-level overview of sort of where we've been, where we were going, and what to expect along the way. And that's what I want to do for you today. I want to take my time in this session to give you an overview of where we've been, where we're going, and what you might expect along the way in this journey to interoperable and secure building automation systems. The presentation I'm going to do today will really have 4 parts. We'll talk a little bit about why it is that people care about cybersecurity. We'll talk a bit about some guidelines, some core principles that sort of guide our journey. And then talk a little bit about how we can go faster, what we have been doing to accelerate, and what we may be doing next to accelerate as cybersecurity becomes more and more central to many of our companies and our projects. So let's start with this question of, does anyone care? Well, I think it's safe enough to say that if people don't care, they will soon. It didn't take too much of a Google search to find a number of examples worldwide of incidences where building automation systems being inadequately secured led to serious cost and operational problems for building owner-operators. These are just a few examples I put up here, but they show the variety and the global reach of the problem. And these reflect the fact that when there's an intrusion, when there's a cybersecurity problem in a commercial building automation system, it can lead to costs in time, money, and customer goodwill. I don't know if everyone cares about cybersecurity yet, but you can be sure the people represented in these examples certainly do. Now, another example, or or indication, if you will, of the importance to people of cybersecurity is this little chart here. So in the last year, BACnet International has conducted and posted on YouTube 3 cybersecurity webinars related to the use of BACnet SC in cybersecurity applications. Over that time, over 1,000 people have gone to look at those webinars. And there are hundreds more people on this webinar right here. So it's both an important and current topic. People care. And because owners and operators care, manufacturers care. Right? Suppliers want to respond to their customers' current and future needs. And pretty much all the suppliers in the BACnet world in building automation have recognized that their customers either will or are already requiring more sophisticated cybersecurity in their applications. We've seen that in products that show up at PlugFest over the last cycle in the spring. There were probably close to 24 products that showed up in various forms of development, various states of development with BACnet SC implementations. And a number of products have already been applied for and working through BTL testing for BACnet SC compatibility and conformance. So people do care. Things are moving in the right direction. But as we move towards cybersecurity and more secure systems, we need to have some guidelines. So I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about some core principles that need to guide us on this journey. The first core principle is that building owners and operators need building automation cybersecurity that is appropriate to their business requirements. So the needs of a corner drugstore and the needs of a large metropolitan hospital for cybersecurity are very different. So it's important that our cybersecurity solutions are able to scale up and down to match the requirements and the business objectives of different owner-operators. And that's just like BACnet itself, which scales up and down and is very flexible to address small projects and huge campus projects seamlessly. Another core principle is that the industry cannot give up interoperability for cybersecurity. We've spent decades getting away from individual proprietary communications platforms to BACnet so that we have the kind of interoperability we need to build integrated systems which allow us to construct intelligent buildings, which are the foundation for smart cities. We can't give that up in pursuit of cybersecurity. We somehow need to bring them together. Building automation systems interoperability starts with BACnet. Right, BACnet is 80 or 90% of US project specifications include BACnet. The latest market studies say 60, 70% or more of global projects include BACnet. So that is the integration platform for building automation. And so cybersecurity has to work within that context. And that's why we're here talking today about cybersecurity in the context of BACnet and building automation. Those of you who are paying attention and involved in the technical part of BACnet would understand that BACnet Secure Connect, or BACnet SC, adds some key interoperable security features. That was released in the specification a couple of years ago and is showing up in projects and products now. Addendum CC is a further enhancement of the BACnet specification, which is now released and provides some additional security features and interoperability features. And there are more enhancements to the specification coming that will continue to extend that interoperable cybersecurity right in the BACnet protocol itself. But it's important to understand that not all elements of cybersecurity are suitable for BACnet standardization. There are elements about interoperable cybersecurity that require interaction with IT platforms that aren't part of BACnet systems. So there's a need for things beyond just the BACnet spec. And finally, the fact is that IT moves faster than building automation. Now, that's not a surprise to anybody. Right? Equipment goes in buildings and it stays there for decades. Equipment goes in IT rooms and it stays there for years, a few maybe, depending on how quickly they turn things over. So IT moves faster than building automation, and cybersecurity is an IT technology. So building automation cybersecurity has to move at the speed of IT, even though the building infrastructure moves at the speed of buildings. That's a challenge we have to overcome. We have to bring cybersecurity into our solutions in a way that it can evolve faster than the underlying hardware does. Now, if we look at where we are in our journey, starting at the bottom of this slide, you'll recognize that BACnet itself provides a vast array of interoperable components for building automation systems. The work that's been put into BACnet over the last couple of decades have created the core platform that allows for interoperability among subsystems and devices and functions within a building and even among buildings. As the requirements for security changed, it became more important to build cybersecurity into BACnet itself. And it's not necessarily the case that systems implemented before BACnet SC weren't secure. It's just that they were secured outside of BACnet using VPNs or some other technologies. And as the world gets more sophisticated and BACnet systems get interconnected more with web platforms, it becomes more and more important that the cybersecurity components go into the protocol itself. And that's what BACnet SC did. Now, what comes next beyond just authentication and message security is interoperable authorization. All right. So BACnet SC provides assurance that devices on the network are permitted to be there, that they're actually devices that should be on the network. BACnet SC also ensures that a message doesn't get changed between the sender and the receiver. The next part of interoperable cybersecurity will add to that the authorization security, that is knowing that a message comes from someone who's authorized to send that particular message. So more and more of that will come over the coming years. To move at the speed of IT, we have to do some focused and dedicated effort. So if we look at the last couple of years, there has been a group within the BACnet global community that's been organized by Symmetrics, which has tried to accelerate the cybersecurity activity in building automation through a couple of different ways. One is developing concepts and proposals and thoughts that go into the SSPC 135, which is the committee that creates and extends the BACnet standard. So that results in addenda to the standards, right? That's how BACnet SC got done. That's how addendum CC got done, and that's how future things will get done. That group has also created an initial manufacturer's guide, which was being submitted to ASHRAE, which will then take it and review it and publish it as a special publication. So that's the process for the content that doesn't fit in the context of the BACnet protocol, but is important to have commonality among suppliers and users in order to get interoperable systems. So that's what's been done so far. Now, when we look at that manufacturer's guide, it's primarily written for people who are creating products, right? So it's really designed for manufacturers, and it makes a lot of recommendations that help improve interoperable cybersecurity. It's really not a guide written for the casual owner-operator or the casual system integrator to read, although it might be useful for those who have the technical underpinnings to see what's going on in the product side, so they can think about their own strategy going forward. Now, that guide is not static, right? Cybersecurity is moving quickly. So the guide needs to continue to evolve, and the specification needs to continue to evolve, and accelerating deliberate focus needs to continue to evolve. So it's at least proposed now that the work that the Symmetrics group had done becomes a project inside of BACnet International that does the necessary work. Yes, does the necessary work to extend that guide and keep it current, as well as continue to provide information to the SSPC. Now, that program that's proposed is built on the concept of the BACnet SC Acceleration Program that we ran over the last couple of years, except it's a little broader than BACnet SC. So it's a Cybersecurity Acceleration Program, and the goal of that program is to help manufacturers and early adopter users understand more fully the cybersecurity implications of what's coming next in the BACnet specification and in the guideline document, probably to generate some reference implementations for those, and then to move on and facilitate the continued evolution of those. If you're with a manufacturer or you're interested in that program, please contact Dave Nardone at david@bacnetinternational.org. And he'll get you set up with more information as that program evolves and gets implemented. There's also an overview of the cybersecurity roadmap, or summary, if you will. You can find it on BACnet International's website/journal. And it's one of the journal articles from the most recent BACnet journal from BACnet International. So in summary, everyone cares about building automation cybersecurity, or they soon will. And our requirement as an industry is cybersecurity plus interoperability. And to get there, we need community engagement. We need programs like the Acceleration Program, programs like the ones Symmetrics put together. Those are an essential part of moving this industry forward fast enough to keep up with IT. And if we don't keep up with IT and cybersecurity, then we're not accomplishing the goal. So with that, let me turn the conference over to Jim Lee, who will talk a bit more about the importance and implications of IT best practices and technologies in building automation cybersecurity. Jim, all yours.
Great. Thanks very much, Andy. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you.
Sounds great. Okay, well, that was a great introduction, and thanks, Andy, for laying out how a little bit of the history of what's gone on over the years and a little bit of the structure. What I'd like to talk about is the importance of adopting IT industry best practices as we go forward on this building automation cybersecurity journey. So without further ado, let me just click here. There we go. So as Andy pointed out, and as we all know, cybersecurity attacks against buildings are on the rise. The threat landscape has been growing, and attackers are targeting IoT devices, OT devices, etc. And if we look at this progression as we've moved forward from no computing to the internet, we can see that more and more threats have increased over time. We're really getting to a tipping point where we've got a lot to worry about. Let's get into a little bit more specifics here. So if we look at the attack surface of a building, we have traditional IT security threats, ransomware, social engineering, front-end systems, etc. But the thing that I think is really key to understand is there are two things to worry about here. One is people that are there to attack the building automation systems themselves, which is certainly very germane to what we worry about. But there's also the use of building automation infrastructure to attack the broader IT enterprise networks. And IT and we should be very concerned about that as well. So it's not enough to worry about securing our own systems, but we have to be good citizens in this broader IT world to make sure that our networks are not used to attack other enterprise networks that we may be using or sharing. Good. So in order to do that, the folks in IT have spent a lot of time thinking about this problem. And they think about it in terms of what they call defense in depth. And what that is it's a series of security related issues. And I want to point out right from the get-go that a lot of these things are not technology based. A lot of them are organizational or cultural based in terms of how we handle information, how we handle passwords, and how our organizations are designed. In fact, and this is actually requiring somewhat of a redesign in terms of organizational behavior. But if we look at it, you can see organizational culture, then physical security, perimeter security, network security, host security, application security, and finally device security. As I go through this discussion, we're going to look at different layers of security that have been added to this picture. But I just wanted to give you this broad introduction of how IT people are looking at the problem. And in fact, the National Institute of Standards and Technology has come up with this cybersecurity framework, which breaks down into 5 general categories: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. The kinds of things that need to be done organizationally and in terms of technology to help the security problem. Now, as an industry, we need to focus certainly at first on the technology, but as on the total solution as well, so that we can help organizations of our customers move forward in these in these different capacities to fix these things. So if you look at areas that we're working on in terms of technology, these kinds of things in here are where BACnet Secure Connect and others would land. So just as a little history for where we've been in building automation and cybersecurity, you can see we had primarily mechanical and pneumatic controls, with DDC being introduced in 1983. Most of those DDC systems at that time were proprietary, and there was security through obscurity. BACnet hit the scene in 1995. But I think the big discontinuity to look at in this part of the picture here between pneumatic and DDC is that the internet came into prominence. So BACnet was designed before the internet, but quickly adapted by using BACnet IP so that BACnet traffic could go over the internet. However, there wasn't really a secure solution. So at that time, people that were security conscious started basically building a moat or an outer perimeter security around the building automation they were doing. And they did that principally through virtual private networks and VLANs. And that's basically what we've had as protection over that period of time. In 2002, you can see BTL listing started. In 2004, the BACnet committee basically organized the best and brightest minds of our industry to come up with a security solution, a cybersecurity solution that went all the way from the terminal end devices all the way up to the workstations and enterprise components of the system. At Symmetrix, we were not happy with that solution because it did not rely on IT protocols. And it was our point of view that as the IT world evolves in 3-year cycles and the building automation world evolves at 30-year cycles, that whatever we completed would be obsolete by the time it was published. And so we began working on that time with some friends at Cisco to work on something called IT-friendly BACnet. So how could we take the best value of BACnet, the application layer, the data definitions, the default behaviors, and apply that technology on top of whatever the IT networks du jour would be. And so that was the idea of IT-friendly BACnet. We stood up a committee under the auspices of ASHRAE called the BACnet IT Working Group, which was chaired by Jim Butler. And about 10 years later, we were able to produce BACnet SC. And BACnet SC we'll go into a little more later in the presentation how that works. However, when we produced BACnet SC, there were a number of elements that occurred to us that were sort of beyond the scope of BACnet that needed general resolution by the industry and manufacturers before real interoperable products could be built. Let me just shed some light on that for a minute. Although we've done a lot of worrying about cybersecurity in BACnet, a lot of these underlying technologies that we depend on are not controlled by BACnet. So in that gap, there was quite a bit of work to do. So in basically, as soon as BACnet SC came out, we convened a group called the Secured by Symmetrix Consensus Building Group to work on technology. And in fact, we've done that. And a new interoperable cybersecurity standard, which is built and backed on top of BACnet SC, will be forthcoming shortly. This is just a list of all of the people that contributed over a 2-year period on weekly calls in the creation of this new technology. And I think you'll see that it's the who's who of the industry. How have we been securing BACnet networks so far? As I mentioned, traditionally building network protocols are secured through virtual LANs and the physical separation and use of proprietary protocols. But what this doesn't do is it doesn't give us security down to the end node. It only puts walls around the networks that we have. So the idea of BACnet Secure Connect is actually to build security all the way down so that the end nodes, the VAV boxes, the sensors, the actuators actually have their own security certificates. They are keyed in such a way as to provide security. We're doing that using basically best IT practices, and we're basically only allowing devices that have those security keys to get on the network, whereas before anyone could get on the network. So in a nutshell, just to compare BACnet Secure Connect and traditional BACnet, in traditional BACnet, anyone that's on a network has the capability of talking. You can see traditional BACnet MSTP networks and BACnet UDP IP networks. Anyone that can get on can talk. But in BACnet Secure Connect, we have a concept that you can only talk if you have a security certificate. We're coming up with a new concept that we call a hub. And the hub, you can think of it as a traffic cop or the primary device that communicates to each of the end nodes. The red line here indicates that we can have peer-to-peer communication between those end nodes once that communication has been established through the primary hub. I will point out that we also include a failover hub in the architecture to avoid a single point of failure with the primary hub. So we would expect each building locally to have a primary hub and a failover hub in it as well, although there's nothing that says that the primary hub or the failover hub could be in the cloud as well. So all nodes use TCP/IP security using TLS 1.3 encryption. Each node has a unique digital cert, and network participation is controlled by the certificate authority. We're going to get more into that later in this presentation. BACnet SC hubs orchestrate all the connections, and they are either through the hub or peer-to-peer. So that's generally it. Everything is secure here. Everything is insecure here. So working on top of BACnet Secure Connect, what we're interested in doing is establishing an industry-wide interoperable resilient framework to manage BAS systems and devices securely using IT infrastructure and best practices to handle buildings and portfolios. How do we propose to do that? We propose to do that through this architecture, which this is the Secured by Symmetrics Technical Consensus Building Process Architecture. And if you look at this architecture, we'll start out with devices down at the bottom. And these devices would be BACnet Secure Connect devices that have management technology that allows them from a cybersecurity perspective to be overseen in this broader network. In order to connect to legacy systems, such as BACnet IP or BACnet MSTP, we're looking at having a managed routing firewall, which basically allows secure messages potentially to flow this way and insecure messages not to flow in this direction. When we have third-party proprietary gateways, proprietary networks, we'll need managed BACnet gateways to talk with them. Now, supervising this whole device is a local network and security manager. And you can think of the function of this device as being a device that can set up and talk to everything and manage cybersecurity on the site. But most importantly, it also talks to IT, because as IT and building automation merge, there has to be some connection. And the thought is that the things in the building are going to be present for 30 years, and technology and IT is going to change every 3 years. So this box actually forms an impedance matcher, or matches those two different time constants of the different industries, and serves up the kinds of IT security things that IT groups and their existing cybersecurity technology need to see. The global network and security manager is basically the same as the local network and security manager, but in the cloud, so as to be able to handle different broader portfolios. Okay. Now, very importantly, what is to be managed? And there's a long list here, but we're going to start with device onboarding. How do we sign up and get different secure devices onto the network? How do we manage those certificates? Many large customers require their IT departments to provide those certificates, and the building automation vendor and building owner will have to use the certificates that are presented from their IT group in these controllers. Asset management, how do we keep track of everything that's out in the field and its cybersecurity behavior? Routing firewall policies. I mentioned there'll be firewalls. We have to have the ability to establish those routing firewall policies to decide what information goes through and what information doesn't. Network and security configuration. You can imagine that if each node in the system has a security certificate, does the facilities guy now need to have a PhD in information technology to change the VAV box? Well, as an industry, we're working very hard through the different manufacturers and tools to standardize how that configuration can be done to try to ease that process, because there's a lot of complexity in technology here. Backup and restore. If you have one vendor of cybersecurity and you're going to back up and restore the programs, which is necessary in that NIST cybersecurity framework, what happens when you have a multi-vendor system? So we're trying to build rules around how to handle that. Server and controller recovery. What happens to, how do you get the thing going once it's been hacked? Version and firmware tracking. How do we globally keep track of where all the different firmwares are and when things are getting updated? And finally, as I mentioned, IT integration, or feeding SIEM tools and other IT tools what they're used to seeing, except from our networks. And finally, BACnet migration of non-SC. So we don't expect the world to change very quickly from BACnet IP to BACnet Secure Connect. But having this management structure and a way to mitigate that by having these managed routing firewalls allows us to use the existing networks and secure networks in the same facility. So how do we manage those certificates? As I mentioned before, sometimes the vendor will provide and be the certificate authority. In other applications, the IT department of the building owner may provide those. I want to point out that cybersecurity is a collaborative process. And I think that that's really important, because every time I get to building automation, everything is thought of as a project or a product. And that's not what this is. This is a forever process where we have to go through and identify new groups of people that are across the company who are going to deliver an ongoing process rather than a product or a project. Finally, what does cybersecurity cost and who's going to pay for it? And this is a big discontinuity in the market right now, because buildings are capital assets. Capital is only allocated for buildings when they're built or sold. and the lifetime of buildings and mechanical systems is in excess of 30 years. But information technology in business is an ongoing operating expense. The lifetime of the IT equipment is 3 years. So how do we fuse those things when our business thinking is set on things that only fund projects or products? And this is an example of how the Department of Defense is grappling with this now. We expect them to be a fairly early adopter of this kind of cybersecurity. But this is to point out that the DoD has about 8 million computers, and they spend $30 billion a year to provide cybersecurity to those 8 million computers. The Department of Defense has 2 billion OT type network devices, and they're currently spending only 150 million. So as you can see, we're going to have to go to a progression because it doesn't cost zero to provide cybersecurity for people to change or add budgets so that we can tackle this huge problem in the future. Thanks. I'm going to turn it over to Carol now.
Okay, so I'm going to talk today about planning for and designing cybersecure BACnet projects and kind of some early lessons from what we learned with rolling out BACnet SC. I'm going to talk about the importance of cybersecurity. I think we've heard it from Andy and Jim. BACnet is an open interoperable protocol. And then maybe some really eye-opening first impressions from our field technicians and field engineers about BACnet SC and all the cybersecurity stuff that they have to learn and work with. And finally, just some information that IT professionals ask. And I've been on many phone calls where, they'll ask specific questions. And then at the end of my presentation, we'll take questions. So I don't think there's any doubt in anyone's mind that, of what the importance of cybersecurity is for our building automation systems. We've been talking about, the costs and the attention and disruptions that cybersecurity incidents cause. I just want to make you aware of the United States has, is taking note of that and improving their our cybersecurity posture. In fact, there's a U.S. executive order that I'm showing you on the screen, and you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, enforce standards to prevent, detect, assess, and so forth. 2, remove barriers to threat information sharing. 3, modernize federal government cybersecurity. 4, enhance software supply chain security, and on and on. So this is not in 5 years. This is what all vendors have to work towards. Or you just won't be accepted, your products won't be accepted on government jobs or certain commercial jobs as well. So I think you've heard again from Andy and Jim too, what are the costs? And I looked up a couple of reports and, they're saying just in 2020, it was $8.64 million was the average cost of a data breach. And sometimes people find that hard to believe, but if you ever had to work on something or dig up some information on your software or your software vendors, you will understand that it takes time and we've got to be better prepared to look at this and to react to these data breaches. And your products or system may not have been even impacted by it, but you might get a call that says, hey, can you tell us a little bit more about your software? And another report, the second one here is just saying, just the global average cost is, $6 trillion annually. So again, it's just horrific, the costs here, and just what, this is real, these are real numbers, and most likely because people underreport, they're probably higher than what's reported. So as earlier Jim showed, if you look at BACnet IP has only been around since 1999. And here we just got BACnet SC. The standard was released in 2019. So now you have manufacturers producing products and releasing their products now. And we've all been working towards what comes next. And not because BACnet SC is insufficient by itself, it's because we only got after, as Jim said, because we wanted to get it out there, certain aspects of the BACnet protocol to protect it and the data transfer. But as I'll point out, it still needs to cover other things. And that's why we went and organized and started forming the group called, and talk about managed BACnet, because it's got to include more things. It's not just the protocol or the data or the message you receive back, or the fact that it's secured. You can prove that, it's encrypted. You need a little bit more than that, like authorization and user accounts and things like that. So you'll see more to come, definitely. But if I just review with you BACnet SC and cybersecurity, just kind of look at the two boxes here. BACnet over IP, remember that we got that in 1999. BACnet SC, we got it in 2019. We're just now getting products out. But as you can see, the messages are encrypted. It follows, most IT practices with the TLS. And it's IP over TCP, not anymore IP over UDP. It uses standard IT protocols. I'll show you a slide with all the RFCs heading, and it all points back to the Internet Engineering Task Force. So BACnet is a standard, and it uses standard IT practices, and you'll see. And also just some of the practices that different vendors may have that, take note of the SC network port object, and some defaults. Maybe some vendors will use a different network number to isolate. This is BACnet SC versus BACnet IP. So these are the kind of new things, and that again, when you're planning and designing for these projects, you got to somehow get the install team, educated, trained on this stuff, so they know what they have to do. And certainly when it comes to this new BACnet stack to the right, you can see that the green box and the WebSockets with the lock, that's the secure piece that they added. They added a new data link. Okay, and again, this topology, we're using the virtual hub and spokes, is where we have a primary hub. And then if you're looking at the screen, it's this picture here. The primary hub's in the center, and then you've got these nodes all around, and then you have a failover hub also defined. So you can not have a single point of failure, right? And so for these systems, again, for the devices to be able to talk to one another, they have to have a specific communication certificate from a particular CA, all from the same CA, or some people, sometimes we explain it as a club or something, but it's the same CA, so that you can't have a rogue device trying to spoof something or try to get onto the system. So, and once the network is up and a node wants to talk to the primary hub, or possibly another node, there is a mutual authentication going on before they even start communicating. So they check each other, and again, if they're from the same CA, they have a valid certificate, ECC certificate, then they'll be able to communicate. The other kind of nice things that that are available through the standard would be that, you can have devices that you can integrate still devices, say the vendor hasn't deployed their products for BACnet SC yet. There is a way to securely still have your BACnet over IP devices running, and separate that, so you can have a separate piece of the network where BACnet SC devices are running. So you can still separate But you have to watch out on these configurations, you know, if you can still trust the data, or you can do some things as Jim Lee proposed. There are some things we're proposing in the near future that we talk about in the manufacturer's guide, where you can isolate some data and yet use it in your system. And the last couple of things is you have information, again, from your standard, and and you can get the status of things. So some of the first impressions of the technicians are, wow, this is really new and complex. We need a different workflow. We need to have this documentation. I need to have more information on training of PKI, and I need to know how to troubleshoot, because, you know, they get it, it's encrypted. So how in the heck am I going to be able to troubleshoot it? And then once you explain the first version of what's in Addendum BJ, which is now Annex AB, you know, we don't have an automated way to manage the certificates that's interoperable. So it's up to each vendor, and then you have to get with each other to get the CSRs and to give out the certificates. So there's a lot here. So then first impressions are, wow, it's very complex. Well, remember, we've had 23 years with BACnet over IP. So you can't expect to learn this BACnet SC Secure Connect overnight. So we understand that. So when speaking to the IT professionals, they're planning big projects, designing, and the first thing they'll ask is BACnet a standard? You know, and then I'll explain, yeah, BACnet's been, you know, a standard, the actual, you know, ASHRAE ANSI standard since 1995. And then it became an ISO standard, I think, in 2003. So yes, it is a standard. It's a standard protocol. And they'll also ask, you know, can they get a copy? And, you know, you have to tell them, yep, we'll have to buy a copy for you, and so forth. So there's a little bit more, you know, like I said, probing by the IT professionals, because they're not used to our BACnet. They don't know what BACnet is. They know about their IT protocols and things. So I often refer them back to the RFCs, and I'll show you at the end of the slide. And then, you know, the good thing you can talk about, if you're running all BACnet SC, you will eliminate those BACnet broadcast storms, because on that BACnet SC network, none of the broadcasts are going out onto the other segments, maybe for customer corporations network. So they're limited right to that BACnet SC. So just some conclusions, you know, we all have to recognize BACnet SC is new and it's complex. It's going to take a few years to get where we're comfortable, like we are today with BACnet or IP. It's exciting. However, there's some new concepts they got to learn. You know, this public key infrastructure, how to get the certificates, the need to plan early, the need to understand how to troubleshoot, you know, and just managing these certificates, because they might expire in 3 years or 1 year. Maybe the customer wants them to be 1 year. And so you got to know how you're going to manage those certificates, or who's going to manage them. Is the customer's IT department going to manage them? And then what about integrating with third-party devices and systems? So just want to conclude that BACnet is here. It meets the requirements for the IT conscious projects, but we do still have a lot to train people on and get used to the BACnet SC. Here's my slide of references. Again, it'll be in the slide and part of this program.
All right, so I want to thank both Carol and Jim for their contributions and their presentations, and we have time for a few questions, but we won't have time for all the questions. I think all the questions are good questions. So rather than leave you hanging, let me tell you two things. One, you will get an email pointing you to a recording of this webinar if you want to see it again, or need to pass that link on to somebody else. And two, we will post the answers to all of the questions, including the ones we can't get done today, in a user forum that you can access at the BACnet Institute. So if you go to the BACnet Institute at BACnetinstitute.org, you'll find there are online courses, there are articles and things, but there's also a community forum. And in that forum, you'll find answers to all these questions a couple days from now. So that's a resource you can go to. In the meantime, let's try to get a couple questions knocked out here. Let me do some that will be pretty quick to answer. The first one, Jim, why don't you take this one? Is the initial manufacturer's guide from the Symmetrics working group available for general public review?
It isn't quite yet, but it will be in a few weeks, and we will be posting it on our website and mailing it out as well, emailing it out to many interesting people. Please feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to make sure you get a copy. Once the ASHRAE special publication comes out, we're going to refer you to that and probably take down the Symmetrics version of the document.
Great. Carol, a quick one I think falls kind of in your camp. As the question, does the BACnet SC within the secured network just eliminate the need for BBMDs?
Well, if you're running only BACnet SC, yes, you do not need the BBMDs. It's where you have a mixed site. Maybe a VFD isn't available with BACnet SC. So yes, you will have cases and you will have to use it in that case.
Good, thank you. Another question I think is pretty quick to answer was whether or not BACnet SC data will be included in the PICs or there'll have to be some other document. The BACnet SC information is already in the PICs, in the latest version of PICs, as products are already going through BTL testing, referencing those PICs. So we're good with that. Another question, Jim, this kind of came up during your talk, and that is the BACnet SC primary hub a hardware or some kind of virtual thing?
It can be either, but we do expect the primary hub to, or one of the hubs, either the primary or the failover hub, to be in the building in case cloud connection is cut. But it could be, depending on the manufacturer, it could be part of the controller, it could be a standalone box, it could be in a data center. So none of these things are defined by BACnet, and I think you'll have to refer to your local manufacturer to see how they've decided to frame that product.
Okay, good. So Carol, there's one here for you. I think is sort of like, it's sort of a statement, but there's an implied question, which is, our attendee can't imagine creating and loading manually 500 certificates on a large project. So as someone here from Johnson Controls, what would you say to that?
Well, we've got tools. And again, once we get the some interoperable management tools, but right now the first release, each manufacturer has tools. And we've kind of accounted for that where, you can select multiple devices and download the certificates, import them and export them. So I'm sure other vendors are doing something similar. Right.
Good, good. Because I couldn't imagine doing it either. So I was really pleased to hear that answer. Maybe this falls in your camp too, or maybe it's in Jim's, maybe both want to answer this one, but does BACnet SC support self-assigned certificates?
Well, it's a great question, right? So there is some wording in the standard that says it should be a CA. So if your vendor is taking on that responsibility, you could have the CA, which is part of a tool, generate certificates. Now, if you're one of those sticklers for security, maybe you're a government entity or whatever, you may not want that, and you want to make sure that it's a CA authority that's given that. It could be the customer, it could be a vendor that's got a relationship with someone who issues like a, DigiCert or something like that, one of those big companies, right?
Okay, good. So Jim, let's put this one back to you. Where does BACnet SC work? On BACnet IP or MSTP or both?
BACnet SC only works on IP-based networks by definition. So this is a key question because the decision was made as to whether it should work on MSTP networks. And in some arcane ways it can, but for all intents and purposes, it is a IP-based network. But that means any IP technology that's out there, whether it's wired, wireless, fiber optics, what have you. But the general thought is that most devices in the industry now are going to IP down to the terminal end nodes. And because of that, with a forward-looking stance, understanding that we have these firewall routers and other things to keep the legacy in place, the idea is that we're going to secure for the future, which is all IP networks and that complete convergence with IT, Andy.
Good, good. So we were asked, what's the cost to implement BACnet SC? And I guess that could be either from a vendor perspective or from a user perspective. So let me try to answer it generically, and you two can chime in with whatever additional you might want. I think the first thing is implementing BACnet SC is implementing another sublayer in the protocol. So it's technical work done by a technical development team. And that can be done by just taking the next generation protocol stack from your stack supplier, if that's how you got your stack, or implementing some more code in your own stack if you wrote your own. And what it costs to do that depends on your development team and your expertise and a lot of other things. At the end of the day, BACnet SC is just more software in a device. So over the long term, the cost of the device shouldn't change because it's still just a processor with some memory cranking along doing things. In the short term, there may be some premiums. In the long term, there might not. It's going to be vendor specific, but clearly in the long term, it's just some more ones and zeros sitting and chipped on there in the device. And I can say that because I don't represent a vendor here. So that's my 2 cents. You two want to add something?
I'll add something. Well, it's a little bit more than that, right? So just the more horsepower you may need in some controllers. And we've discussed this many times on the BACnet working group. If I had a little small fan coil controller on the IP network, right? And I may not have enough horsepower to run it. There's some crunching going on, right? So I might have to go to a different chipset. Well, to the end user, they're not going to understand that, right? I might have to go out with another product, and so and just the other thing is just that chasing down the certificates or asking who's going to provide the certificates. Many times on a new construction project, there's no one around. There's not an IT guy. You're fulfilling your contract with a mechanical engineer. So you've got to have another solution in your pocket, right? I got to be able to give, maybe some certs that are through true CA. They have a life of 2 years or 2 years. And then when the people show up, the IT department, they want to take over, that's fine.
That's a great addition, Carol, because it's important to remember that cybersecurity is a systems thing. It's not a product thing. And the system includes that whole certificate management process, which isn't part of the product, but is still a real component of what an end user has to implement or pay someone to implement, depending on their approach to life. So we have run to the end of our hour, and I don't want to extend beyond that, given that we told people it would be an hour. There are a couple more questions, and we'll post those along with the answers from this set of questions in the forum as I described. Before we go, I would like to thank Carol and Jim for their participation, for the work they put into this, and for the expertise they've shared. And really, I'd like to also thank the back-end team that's made that webinar possible. Under the covers, you all don't see it as attendees, but there's a lot of work going on in that room down in Atlanta, and we appreciate that. So thank you all for attending, and I wish you a great rest of your day.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.